They left him to die alone, his wife, his children, all gone after taking his wealth. But the nurse who stayed, the one who held his hand when no one else would, became the unexpected heir to his $50 million fortune. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a cold, sterile glow across the narrow hospital room. Room 218 at Mercy Hill Medical Center was tucked at the far end of the third floor. Too far for most nurses to bother passing by unless necessary, and far too isolated for a man who once commanded boardrooms and bustling dinner tables. The hum of machines blended with the occasional cough or shuffle of footsteps in the hallway, but in here, silence reigned. James Ellison lay still beneath a rough cotton blanket, his frame sunken and pale. Age had not merely thinned his hair or carved wrinkles into his skin. It had dimmed something deeper. His eyes no longer held the sharpness that once won debates and calmed frightened children. Now they stared past the pale green walls, into a distance only he could see. His days blended together like watercolor left in the rain. Breakfast arrived at 7:30 a.m. on a beige plastic tray he barely touched. His appetite had dwindled along with his strength. The oatmeal grew cold while he looked out the window, watching nothing. The trees had begun shedding their leaves, the golden-orange colors mocking the stillness inside his room. He hadn't seen his children in 2.5 months. Darren had texted the week after James was admitted. "Dad, work's crazy right now. I'll come by soon. Promise." Patrice had left a voicemail, cheerful but distant, about how the kids had soccer tournaments and how the drive to the hospital was so long, you know? His wife, Lorna, hadn't called at all. They had taken everything. 2 sprawling properties, one in the suburbs, the other nestled in the hills, signed over with shaking hands after Lorna pleaded. "It's just easier, James. The taxes, the upkeep. Let the kids manage it now. You should rest." He had agreed. He always did when it came to them. She'd smiled and kissed his forehead, the same way she used to when they were young, only colder this time practiced. 3 weeks later, his accounts were emptied. The family lawyer, a man James trusted for over 20 years, confirmed it. Transferred to a joint account. All authorized. I thought you knew," he had stammered, uneasy. James hadn't protested. Instead, he asked to be taken to the hospital when the pain in his stomach became unbearable. He had stomach ulcers, the doctors said. Stress, poor diet, grief, take your pick. He didn't argue. Now each night he waited. He turned to face the door every time he heard footsteps outside, hoping, expecting. But they never came. Each time it was another nurse with a clipboard, a janitor pushing a cart, or silence walking by in ghostly shoes. He had stopped calling them 2 weeks ago. The silence on the other end was louder than the phone ringing unanswered. His birthday came and went, marked only by a small chocolate cupcake left by the night nurse. She said her name was Stella. She smiled warmly, even if her eyes looked tired. "Happy birthday, Mr. Ellison," she said, placing the cupcake beside his untouched lunch. "You want me to sing?" He had smiled faintly, a slow upward pull of lips that felt like lifting weights. "No need," he said. "It's just another day." But when she left the room, he stared at that little candle for 20 minutes before blowing it out alone. The next night, James pressed the button beside his bed just to see if anyone would come. He wasn't in pain. He wasn't cold. He just wanted to hear a voice. It was Stella again. "You all right, Mr. E?" she asked, brushing crumbs from his tray. He nodded, then whispered, Do you have kids?" She paused, wiping her hands on her scrubs. "No, just a goddaughter." "Why?" He looked away. "They always say they'll come, that they're busy. But people make time when they care." She didn't reply. Instead, she gently took his hand and sat by the bed for a few minutes longer than she needed to. After she left, James looked at the framed photo he kept on the bedside table. It was a family picture from 10 years ago, him in the center, smiling, with his arms around Darren and Patrice. Lorna stood beside him, her arm locked through his. They were all dressed in white, the photo taken at the beach. It was the last vacation they took together. He stared at it now like it was a picture of strangers. That night, he didn't bother turning toward the door. He knew no one would come. Rain tapped gently against the window pane, a rhythmic pattern that matched the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. It was just past 5 p.m. The hospital had begun to dim its hallways, preparing for the quiet hush of evening. Outside, the sky was smudged with gray clouds, the kind that seemed heavy with unspoken sorrow. James Ellison lay in his bed, propped slightly upright, a knitted blanket pulled over his legs. His fingers, thin and marked with age spots, rested loosely over his stomach. The room was dim, save for a soft lamp in the corner that gave the space a warm, amber hue. But warmth could not pierce the cold growing steadily inside him. Today, he remembered. It came not like a flood, but like a steady leak, a slow dripping of memory that soaked through his mind and refused to be ignored. He closed his eyes and saw his hands, younger and stronger, slick with grease as he bent under the hood of a 1978 Pontiac. That was his first job, right out of high school. Long hours at Darnell's auto shop. Back then, Lorna used to bring him lunch wrapped in foil. She'd sit on the curb, swinging her legs, pregnant with Darren, while he wiped sweat from his brow and told her how one day they'd move out of the neighborhood. They did. But not because of fate, because of sacrifice. James worked 2 jobs for 7 straight years. Days at the plant, nights doing security. There were birthdays he missed, anniversaries he barely remembered, and Sunday dinners he skipped so the kids could eat better and Lorna wouldn't have to go back to work so soon after Patrice was born. And she loved him then, he was sure of it. She'd wait up for him, her head dozing on the sofa, the TV humming low in the background. They made it work. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. Its soft tiles reminded him of the cafeteria ceilings in the old warehouse, dingy, colorless, too high to ever feel safe under. That was the year Patrice had a terrible asthma attack, and he couldn't afford the better inhaler. He pawned his grandfather's watch that day. She got better. He never got the watch back. There was never bitterness. At least not then. James never complained about what he gave up. He didn't travel. Didn't golf. Never drank beyond a casual beer. All his money went into the mortgage, into Darren's prep school tuition, into Patrice's dance lessons and summer arts camps. Lorna wanted to open a boutique. He gave her the down payment from his severance package when the plant closed. It had felt good. It had all felt right. Until years later, when thank you began to sound like about time, and love started to feel like obligation. Still, he didn't waver. He kept showing up, kept signing checks, kept swallowing his needs like medicine, too bitter to like, too necessary to avoid. He remembered the day Darren came asking for help with a down payment on a house. Just until I get that promotion, Pops. I got you soon. James had nodded. Of course, son. The promotion never came. Neither did the repayment. Patrice followed suit. It's just for a loan, Daddy. A small one. I'm starting my design studio. James handed her a check without hesitation. He never told them how he'd cashed out part of his pension to do it. Now he was left with nothing but the 4 walls of this room and a body that betrayed him with each passing day. His children, grown and thriving in the very lives he built for them, couldn't be bothered to drive 30 minutes to see him. They texted sometimes, left emojis, but not presents. Never presents. His thoughts drifted back to Lorna. She had changed over the years, so subtly at first it felt like the fading of music instead of a sudden silence. Her voice had become clipped, her attention scattered. She stopped laughing at his jokes. Eventually, she stopped waiting up for him at all. But it was when she convinced him to hand over the property titles that the final light flickered out. They're grown now, James. We're not young. Let them handle things. Let's just enjoy peace. He believed her. He wanted to. He always wanted to. But the paperwork was barely dry before she packed her things and moved in with her sister for a while. That was 3 months ago. The room now felt like a shrine to choices made for others. His comfort, his dreams, his dignity, all laid down piece by piece like bricks in a foundation for people who had walked away once the house was built. There was a knock at the door. He turned his head slowly. Nurse Stella peeked in, holding a small tray with a bowl of soup. "Thought you might be hungry," she said softly. He didn't respond. She entered anyway, placing the tray gently beside him and adjusting his pillow. "You want me to help you sit up a bit more?" she asked. He nodded faintly. As she moved around the bed, adjusting the angles, tucking the blanket around his legs, he looked at her, really looked. There was no expectation in her eyes. No hurry, just quiet care. "You remind me of someone," he murmured. "Who's that?" she asked, smiling. "My mother," he said after a pause. She had kind hands, too. Stella touched his shoulder lightly. "Thank you. That means a lot." As she turned to leave, James looked at the soup, then back at the door. She hadn't asked for anything. That night, he didn't remember what he dreamed. But when he woke up, for the first time in weeks, he felt just a little less forgotten. It was a Thursday morning, overcast but not raining, the kind of morning where the world seemed undecided, half asleep, half ready. Inside room 218, James Ellison was fully awake. His eyes were open, sharp despite the lines around them, watching the seconds tick past on the small white clock mounted above the door. He had asked for the call to be made 2 days ago. Nurse Stella had written it in her neat, slanted handwriting. "Call Mr. Calvin Rhodes. Patient request. Urgent but private." Now he waited. It wasn't pain that woke him today. It was clarity. That strange, sudden lucidity that sometimes visits the dying like an old friend come to say goodbye. James felt it settle into his bones. He didn't speak much that morning. He didn't eat. But his mind raced like a film reel, unwinding years of silence, secrets, and decisions. He had built something most men never managed. A financial safety net so well woven, even his own family didn't know it existed. In the early 1990s, just after the tech boom whispered its first promise, James began to invest, not in big names, but in quiet, fledgling companies. He read articles at night after his shifts, kept a small ledger in his sock drawer, and listened to public radio to track financial trends. It was his private game, a silent mission that fed something in him no one else seemed to notice anymore. Lorna never asked about the account. The children never cared. He let them assume he had given them everything. But he hadn't. Buried behind layers of shell companies and anonymous holdings, protected by an old-school paper trail and managed quietly by a longtime friend in financial law, was his true estate. Stocks, bonds, and compound interest had grown like wild ivy over 30 years, quiet, slow, steady. The final number had stunned even him. Just over $50 million. And none of them knew. At 10:22 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Not the light tap of a nurse or the cautious pause of a visitor. This knock was measured, professional. "Come in," James called, his voice raspier than he remembered. The door opened and in walked Calvin Rhodes, a lean man in his early 60s with sharp glasses and a tailored charcoal suit. He closed the door behind him and approached the bed, offering a respectful nod. "Mr. Ellison," he said, setting down a leather briefcase. "You look tired." "I'm dying," James replied with a wry smirk. Tired comes with the territory. Calvin cracked the barest of smiles before pulling out a folder. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice quieter now. James nodded. "Absolutely. I've had weeks to think about it. I waited for someone to come. A sign. Something. But they're not coming, Cal. They took what they wanted and left." Calvin sat, his pen poised over the signature line. "And Nurse Stella?" he asked. "She held my hand while I vomited blood. She clipped my nails when they got too long. She didn't know who I was. Still doesn't. But she saw me, not the money, not the houses, not what I used to be. Just me." Calvin opened the folder fully now and laid it out. "This will supersedes the previous one. It names Nurse Stella Williams as the sole beneficiary of the full estate held under the Ellison Foundation holdings. All $50 million. James picked up the pen slowly, his hand shaking not from doubt, but from the weakness illness brings. He looked at the line where his name would go and paused. A memory came to him, Darren at 6 years old, asking if superheroes were real. Patrice at 10, writing him a Father's Day poem that made him cry. Lorna's hands on his chest the night they conceived Darren, whispering, "No matter what, it's you and me." Those moments still lived in him. But they had chosen. He had chosen. He signed his name. Each letter came slower than the one before, but he finished with a steady period. Calvin leaned forward, gently retrieved the papers, and slid them back into the briefcase. "It's done," he said. "Do you want me to notify her today?" James shook his head. "No, not until after. Let her live a few more days without it. She's already rich in ways they never were." Calvin stood, looking at the man he had known for nearly 30 years. "You sure they won't contest?" "They can try," James said. "But the money's no longer the point. That girl's going to change lives." Calvin nodded once more. "I'll see to it." After he left, James leaned back into his pillows. The room felt oddly lighter. The beeping of the monitors continued steadily, but it no longer sounded like ticking time. It sounded like rhythm, like music in another room. He reached for the button on the side of his bed and pressed it. A few minutes later, Nurse Stella came in, smiling as always. "Hey, Mr. E, feeling all right?" "I'm fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just wanted to hear a kind voice." She sat beside him, without hesitation, and held his hand again. James stared at the ceiling, at peace now. He had finally given something to someone who saw its true value. Not in numbers, but in humanity. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon when Nurse Stella Williams got the call. She had just finished her rounds and was sitting alone in the staff lounge at Mercy Hill Medical Center, peeling the lid off a yogurt cup she had no real interest in eating. Her shift had been long but manageable. Mr. Collins in room 205 had tried to flirt with her again. The third-floor vending machine was still broken, and she'd had to console a new CNA who had her first patient death that morning. James Ellison had died 3 days ago. The hospital room had felt cold that morning. She'd known before she even stepped inside. Something in the air, the absence of the soft snoring she'd come to recognize, told her that room 218 was empty now in a way it had never been before. She'd sat with him for a while, silently, her gloved fingers brushing the back of his hand. He had passed quietly, his eyes closed, a half-smile on his lips. No one came to claim the body. Stella had filed the death paperwork and returned to work. That was how it went in hospitals. Life was sacred, but death was procedural. So when her phone rang and the name Rhodes and Associates flashed across her cracked screen, she hesitated. "Hello," she answered cautiously. "Miss Stella Williams?" A deep, polite voice replied. "Yes, this is she. This is Calvin Rhodes. I'm an attorney. I was Mr. James Ellison's legal counsel." Stella sat up straighter. Her yogurt cup toppled off her lap and landed, unopened, on the floor. "Oh," she said softly. "Yes. I took care of him." "Yes, I know. He spoke very highly of you." A pause stretched over the line. "I wonder if you could come to our office today," the man continued. "We have a matter to discuss with you. In person." Stella blinked. "In person?" "Yes. I'd recommend you bring someone with you if you'd prefer. A friend. Or, well, someone you trust." She didn't know what to say. Her heart was already racing. Her hands began to tremble. She gripped the phone tighter. "All right. I'll come." The office was in a modest building downtown. A place with polished floors and quiet elevators. She wore her best jeans and a clean white blouse she usually saved for job interviews. Her shoes were scuffed, and her nerves were raw, but she walked in with her chin high. Calvin Rhodes was waiting in a private conference room. He stood as she entered and offered his hand, firm, professional. "Miss Williams," he said with a small nod. She sat down slowly, unsure of what was about to happen. The air was too still. The blinds on the windows had been pulled halfway shut, casting striped shadows across the table. A single envelope sat before her, thick and sealed. I'll be brief, Calvin said, adjusting his glasses. Before Mr. Ellison passed, he amended his will. He left his full estate to you. She blinked at him, confused. Estate? Yes, he continued. Mr. Ellison maintained a private portfolio. Assets totaling just over $50 million. Stella stared at him. The words didn't make sense. 50, she repeated, breath caught in her throat. Million. Correct. She stood abruptly. The chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. Her vision blurred. Her knees felt like they had melted. I'm sorry. I think I need a minute. Calvin was already standing, steadying her by the arm, guiding her gently back into the seat. Take all the time you need, he said. Stella's eyes began to well up. She covered her mouth with one hand. It felt like someone had reached into her chest and rewired her entire heartbeat. Her thoughts were chaotic, flickering like old film. Her overdue rent, the cracked tile in her bathroom, her sister's hospital bills, the little notebook where she tracked every dollar to the cent. James. He had joked with her once about never having cash in his wallet. Now this? But why? She whispered, her voice breaking. Why would he do this? Calvin reached for the envelope and passed it to her. He said you saw him, he replied. That you treated him like a human being, not a burden. That you were the only person who stayed. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside were neatly typed documents, legal but simple. A letter in his handwriting was folded on top, written in shaky penmanship. Stella, I don't have the words for what you gave me in my final days. You made me feel like a man again. Not a patient. Not a number. Just James. This world doesn't reward kindness enough. So I'm doing what I can to even the scale. Live well. Do good. And please, don't ever doubt your worth. With all my gratitude, James Ellison. The tears came freely then. Hot, unstoppable. She bent forward, clutching the letter to her chest, sobbing without shame. Calvin gave her space. He stood quietly near the window, waiting. After several long minutes, Stella looked up. What do I do now? Calvin smiled gently. Whatever you want. It's yours. The first call came on a Sunday. Darren was sitting on a patio in his custom-designed backyard, sipping bourbon and scrolling through emails when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but local. He answered on the third ring, distracted. Yeah. Is this Mr. Darren Ellison? Speaking. This is Rachel from Rhodes and Associates. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Calvin Rhodes. I believe you're listed as the son of the late James Ellison. The glass paused at his lips. Yeah. I am. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Ellison's estate has been processed and finalized. There is no further action required from your family. Darren furrowed his brow. Wait. Finalized? We were supposed to be contacted. Mr. Ellison named a sole beneficiary before his passing. The voice continued, calm but firm. All assets have been transferred accordingly. We've fulfilled all legal obligations. Have a good day. Click. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly behind him. No. No. Within an hour, Patrice knew. Within 2, Lorna was on the phone, her voice cool but tight with control. I need to speak to your boss, she told the receptionist. Now. But the facts would not bend. The documents had been filed. The assets, stocks, properties, accounts were already legally transferred to Stella Williams. The same woman they'd barely acknowledged when she answered the phone on their rare calls to the hospital. The same woman they assumed was just another nurse on rotation. They had not known about the money. Not the real money. They'd thought the houses were the prize. The visible wealth. They hadn't even asked if James had anything else. Why would they? They had already picked his bones clean and left him in a hospital bed with nothing but an overnight bag and a half-worn sweater. The first time they said her name aloud, it was like venom on their tongues. Stella. Lorna said it with a sneer. She manipulated him. She must have. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was sick. He was vulnerable. They called the lawyer. Filed a motion. Demanded a copy of the will. When it came, it was clear, airtight, witnessed, and notarized. Every cent. Every share. Every asset. willed to a woman none of them knew, but whom James had entrusted with the last pieces of his heart. And now it was done. Patrice went silent for days. Her husband asked what was wrong. She said nothing. But her eyes were sunken and dark, and her smiles were brittle. The boutique she ran started to suffer. Her staff whispered about her mood. The bills she thought would be covered by Dad's estate began piling up. Darren tried to mortgage one of the mansions. The bank laughed. He hadn't even paid the first property tax bill yet. And the plumbing was failing. He'd been meaning to call someone. Now the pipes were leaking through the ceiling. He couldn't afford the contractor. Lorna, in her cold, modern condo, stared at the last photo they'd taken as a family. It was taken at a family reunion 5 years earlier. James was smiling, arms around his children. She had been standing beside him, but slightly apart, her smile poised, her eyes already distant. She thought about calling Stella, to demand an explanation, to ask how. But every time she picked up the phone, something stopped her. Guilt, maybe. Or the truth. Because she knew. Deep down, she had known the day she left him at that hospital and never looked back. She had made peace with using him, thinking there would be no consequence. He had always been predictable. Always giving. Always choosing family. But she never considered that, for once, he might choose someone else. 1 week later, Stella stood outside the new glass doors of the Ellison Wellness Center, a modest but beautiful facility on the edge of town. The sign gleamed in bronze above the entrance. Inside, freshly painted walls and newly hired staff buzzed with energy. The clinic offered free care for the elderly, mental health services, and a small wing dedicated to long-term hospice treatment. James's portrait hung in the main hall. Dignified, peaceful. She visited it each morning before she started her day. She hadn't moved into a mansion. She hadn't bought a luxury car. She still lived in the same modest apartment, at least for now. But her life had changed in every way that mattered. She had a team now, a vision, a legacy, and every step she took forward was made in the name of the man no one else had seen until he was already gone. Meanwhile, across the city, in the echoing halls of the homes they once called trophies, James's family sat in silence. No amount of wealth could fix what they had broken. They had bet everything on what they could take from him. But his greatest gift had never been what he gave. It was who he gave it to. And they would carry that loss, not in their wallets, but in their hearts, for the rest of their lives. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.